All right, thank you, everybody. As I said a few minutes ago, my name is Jared Favoli, here from Wonolo. I wanted to thank everybody for joining today's town hall that's titled Ask an Expert, Race, Opportunity, and the Way Forward for America. Before we get started, I wanted to kind of talk through a few things briefly. You know, this town hall is part of a broader series where we're bringing in outside experts to help provide you, the Wonolo community, with insights. So you can expect more of these in the future. And if you have ideas for future town halls or things that you'd like us to discuss and bring some outside experts in to talk about, be sure to let us know. And of course, going forward, we'll always make sure that we keep representation in mind as we build these panels and build these town halls going forward. For those of you who joined on Zoom and can see the displayed message, this is our legal disclaimer. If you can't see it, don't worry. It basically just says that neither Wonolo nor our speakers are here to provide you with tax, legal, or financial advice. I'm going to introduce the speakers in just a minute, and I know that's what everybody is excited about. But I wanted to let you know that you can start queuing up questions on slido.com. So even for folks who weren't able to join on a computer, if you just joined on your mobile phone, you can go to www.slido.com and enter the code 7125. And of course, we will be sure to, once we get to the audience Q&A, to take questions from there. And folks have already started sending in questions, so thank you for that. And please do note that one of the things we're not going to do is we're not going to address any individual incidents that have happened, be they about discrimination or otherwise, through work you've done through the Wonolo platform. But please note that we take all of those seriously. And if you drop any of those comments in the questions, we'll be sure to make sure that somebody gets back to you and reaches back out. I think a few folks had raised some questions when they were registering for the event, and we're having folks reach out to you to make sure that those issues get resolved. So thank you for bringing those to our attention. So we're gathered virtually here today to talk about a tough issue, racism, that has been dominating the news very much recently. There's a lot to talk about, and we're gonna, I'm gonna introduce the speakers in just a minute, but we hope you walk away from this conversation a little bit more informed, with some ideas for how you can play a more active role in your communities. And of course, with two potential role models for how to navigate life, both professionally and personally. So without further ado, let me just get the slide. I'm very excited to introduce our two speakers today. First up is Derrick Morgan. He's a former NFL player for the Tennessee Titans and currently the managing partner for the impact investing fund Kingdom. And our other speaker is Shaka Mitchell, a director for the American Federation for Children, a nonprofit that's dedicated to helping empower low-income families as it relates to education. And while Shaka is not, or was not, a professional athlete, he is a long-distance runner, and we're going to touch on that a little bit during the Q&A. So I'm going to start with just some questions that my team and I kind of compiled, and some of the ones that came in over email while folks were registering. Shaka, I'm gonna start with you because it's on everybody's mind, which is how do you stay sane and how do you keep yourself busy and sane during this pandemic?
There we go. Thanks, Jared. So, and hello to the Wonolo team. Derrick, good to see you again. Thanks for inviting me in. Yeah, how am I staying sane? Well, usually you mentioned that I'm a runner, and I am going on a lot of runs. Unfortunately, you can just barely see it. Last week, I broke my arm riding a bike, so I'm not able to get out right now. So it means I'm back to rewatching The Wire, which has been good. I've been trying to get through Hamilton, and don't hate me, but it's really taken me a long time. I'm not a big musical guy, so it's taken me a while to get through it.
Understandable. Well, The Wire is a good use of anybody's time. It's a great show. Sorry to hear about breaking your arm there, but I guess you got to stick to running and not to bikes. I guess that's our first lesson for today.
That's right.
Derrick, how about you? What have you been doing to kind of stay sane and keep yourself busy and occupied during the pandemic?
Okay, cool. Yeah, so it's been an evolving experience, I would say. About 2 weeks into homeschooling, I put in my 2 weeks notice for being the teacher of my kids, and that was an interesting experience. And really, just more seriously, is being able to maintain focus when there's so much chaos going on and there's so many news stories and narratives and everything going on. It's just it's easy to procrastinate and lose focus because you really don't know what's happening in the world. So once I got over that little hump of just really trying to figure out and diagnose what's going on, I really I always revert back to my routine and just staying in a routine and staying methodic about the daily disciplines that I've instilled in my life throughout my career. Whether that's working out, whether that's reading every day, getting time in the Word, prayer, just the daily disciplines of that kind of keep me rooted. So that really keeps me sane throughout this time.
That's really helpful to hear. How would you rate yourself as a teacher? What grade would you give yourself?
I don't even think I'm on the scale. Like if I could have been fired, I would have been fired. But I quit. So we're I let my wife take over. We were trying to do shifts. 2 hours here, 2 hours there, trying to teach an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old different curriculum. Yeah, I'm not cut out for that. But I'm probably an F if I had to grade myself.
I imagine. I know it's really hard. I have twin daughters who fortunately aren't school age yet, but even then, that's hard. They're hard enough to deal with, and we don't have to teach them too much yet.
Yeah.
I know you obviously run and manage impact investing fund, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about Kingdom and why you think it's relevant today.
Yeah, so I'll just start with how Kingdom was founded, and it basically was a culmination of a lot of my journey to date. About 5 years ago, the social injustice conversation was very relevant, and it has continued to be. But it seemed like at that moment it was hitting another peak, and I'm like probably halfway through my career, and I started to think about, okay, like I see the protests and I see all these injustices, like what can I do, personally? Let's start with me. And the biggest thing for me was I didn't have like a whole bunch of time, given that we had to play in the NFL, and so for me it was more about where my dollar was invested and how I was investing my money. And a lot of the things that I was invested in, I didn't really understand what they were. Like I was in ETFs and stocks and bonds, and great, but what is that actually, what's that company's actual footprint on society? I didn't know that. I watched a documentary called The 13th. They dove into the private prison industry and how those are publicly traded companies. I immediately called my advisor and said, hey, look, make sure I'm not in Core Civic, GEO Group, all these different companies. He said, no, you're good. So that started the process really of me transitioning, most of my own capital into more impactful investments that made sense to me, that made an impact in the communities that look like where I come from. So whether that's affordable housing and, investing in minority entrepreneurs and platforms that do tech training in underserved communities. And so like those things to me were tangible. And it was something where I was like, okay, I might not have the time capacity, but I can at least know that my dollar is invested in these types of companies that, are making a positive impact in the world. And so, when I retired really about a year ago, I simultaneously launched Kingdom Group, which was essentially trying to do what I've been doing personally, but at a larger scale. So bringing in, like-minded investors and other stakeholders who want to have a role in being part of the solution. And so primarily right now, we're focused on real estate development and getting a few projects off the ground in opportunity zones. One of them being my hometown. The whole city was designated an opportunity zone. It's an old steel town right outside of Philly. And so we've spent a lot of time in that market and as well as here in Nashville. So that's primarily what Kingdom is, and we're continuing to scale it.
That's great, and I want to talk more about the importance of affordable housing and real estate in a minute. And I wanted to turn to you, Shaka, because I think we'll through this conversation talk about some of the pillars that can help, you know, uplift the disadvantaged community. One of them is definitely affordable housing and real estate, and another one, which I know is important to both of you, is education. So Shaka, if you could tell me a little bit about the role, of course, that education has played personally in your own life, but professionally in what you do and why you think it's foundational to addressing some of the concerns we're seeing in society.
Sure. Yeah, I think for me, education, kind of as an issue or topic, is almost like a first cause. You know, I remember being in college and at the presidential debate then, and that was, let's see, this would have been early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, and it was Bush Gore. And I remember, you know, there was many of the same debates we're having, we still have today: healthcare, you know, big programs like Social Security, and et cetera. What's the economy doing? Blah, blah. And I remember just thinking, it's crazy for us to think we can have a conversation about, like an in-depth conversation about economics or about healthcare, when you have so many people who don't have the critical skills to even be able to analyze what they're hearing from their doctor or what they're hearing from a banker, et cetera. And just to give you some numbers here in Nashville, I live in Nashville also. In Nashville, only 29% of students are on grade level for reading in third grade. So 29% of students are on grade level in third grade, right? When you look at students of color, it drops to only 20%. So only 1 in 5 students, and these are third graders, right? So we're not talking about teenagers who are, you know, who are years behind. These are third grade is what, 8 years old. Education, right? This is stuff that can't be taken from you. Then you've got skills that in a rapidly changing world, you can sort of pivot and make the next move, better yourself and your situation and your community. So, you know, I think education is it's a civil right. I do think it's part of a broader civil rights movement. The civil rights movements of the 60s, it wasn't about just getting in a school building. It was trying to access what was in the building. It's trying to access and pull that out. Like there's learning happening there. It should be happening for all kids.
Yeah, and folks can see if they can see the slide, but both of you have advanced degrees as well and have taken education seriously yourselves, which is really awesome to see. I wanted to tie back to what you were saying, Derrick, about, you know, your own community that you grew up in and around Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and of course the importance of opportunity zones and the investments you're doing there. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what some of those investments either look like that you've done or might look like as you're starting to do them. I know you're still somewhat new in with your business.
Yeah. So I'll start with the approach that we take, and what I've seen in my, you know, brief investor, you know, experience is that usually projects come into a community from a top-down perspective, and they come in and they tell the community, you know, what is going to be, you know, constructed in this area, and so just to kind of get on board with it. And I don't believe that that's the way that you do true community development. I think it's more of a bottom-up approach. And so I'm not going to come into a particular market and say, hey, look, we're going to put a, you know, 200-unit multifamily apartment complex right here. That may not be the need. We need to get into the community and talk to the community and understand, you know, what are some of the pain points, what are some of the gaps, what are some of the deficits and needs of the community. And that way we shape our plan around those things. And so that's the approach that we've been taking. It takes a little longer, but I think that it yields better the best results, right, from an inclusive standpoint. And so that's what we represent in our approach is inclusiveness and equity. We want there to be multiple seats at the table from different tax brackets, from different socioeconomic and racial backgrounds. And so you talk about my hometown, right? We had some ideas of doing affordable housing, but when talking to the city and some of the nonprofits and some of the churches, there seemed that there didn't need to be any more affordable housing, right? There was somewhat of a concentration of poverty, and that wasn't one of the biggest, priorities from the city's perspective. However, one thing that did start to emerge was there was a lack of quality education, and there was a lack of youth engagement. There was high gang activity. There is high gang activity. A lot of idle time for the youth. So we started to put a plan together around that problem. So what we're currently sitting on now is a plan to do a 115,000 square foot sports complex that also has a food and retail hall, and also can serve as an event center whenever those things start happening again. So like that was really, an example of a bottom-up approach, consulting with the community, different stakeholders, and putting together a plan that's both obviously has to financially pencil out, but what is going to be the social impact. And we've actually, we hold ourselves to a high standard. We brought on Howard Buffett to our team. He's Warren Buffett's grandson, and he has this lowercase IRR, which is an impact rate of return. So it gives you specific metrics from a social lens, whether it's jobs created or education attained, or just different metrics that you can input, and it spits back out a certain IRR, lowercase IRR, to go along with the traditional regular IRR. So that's one thing that we've implemented into our approach, and it takes time, but we think it yields the best results.
That's really great to hear, and it sounds like is the IRR taken to basically the rate of return is not just looking at regular factors like how much money you can make, but it's looking at like societal impact. Is that right?
Exactly.
That's great. And you said I wanted to emphasize something you talked about, which is that your approach takes a little bit longer, and it sounds like it takes longer because you're going into the community almost like not like a reporter, but like a researcher going in with your team and like really talking to people of all levels of society to understand the needs, as opposed to just like shoving your ideas on that community. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. That's great. And we'll share after this, where folks can learn more about some of the efforts and more about Kingdom too. We'll make sure we share some links out. Now you mentioned the sports complex. So of course, if we've got an athlete of your caliber on a call, we can't not ask about athletics and sports. And I'm gonna get to you, Derrick. But Shaka, I know that while you weren't a professional athlete, I know that sports are really important to you. And athletics are really important to you. And you recently wrote an essay that we'll share after, but I'm going to read the title if you don't mind, which is called Running in Darkness. It is one thing to run in the dark. It is another thing entirely to run while dark. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that essay and what prompted you to write it and what sort of takeaways you think folks should have from that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm definitely not a professional athlete. I'm barely an amateur athlete, apparently, on some days. That essay really came from a place, I guess the critical piece or the catalyst was the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, in Brunswick, Georgia, earlier in the year. But, I had only learned about it probably when most of the rest of the world, or the country anyway, learned about it in May. Or early May, as I recall, or late April. This was a young man who was out jogging, and he was approached by 2 or 3 white men who, decided to conduct kind of a citizen's arrest. He ended up losing his life. I mean, they killed him via gunfire, and that really just struck me because running is just something that I do. I mean, I've run on track teams and run cross country since I was in 5th grade, or run on the track since I was in 5th grade. Ran in high school, ran some in college, and continue to run today. My wife's a runner, something that we just regularly do. And it's a pretty mundane thing, honestly. I mean, most other sports do running as punishment, right? There are those of us who actually enjoy it. And so, but that being said, even something so mundane, especially for those of us of color, it can have implications that I think the majority culture may not even appreciate. And so that was kind of, struck me, and I felt kind of compelled to write about it a little bit, write about my own experiences. And I also don't mean to say that I've had it worse than other people, right? By no stretch, but I think for those on the call who, probably nearly everybody on the call at some point has just gone for a jog. But what you think about and when you're out on that jog, I think can really, really vary based on what you look like, unfortunately.
Yeah. And you talk about in there, I think one of the parts that was enlightening and chilling, if I can say, to me was I think you had gotten cramps. I can't remember exactly what it was, but you either gotten injured or gotten cramps, and a friend of yours had kind of waved down some police to come kind of help you out, and you were in the back of a police cruiser. And of course, just naturally the way a police cruiser works, you can't get out from the inside. Somebody has to actually let you out. And at one point, the police officer asked, and you don't know if it was jokingly or not, but asked if he could see, see your ID and just run to see if you had any priors or anything like that. And you let him know that you were a lawyer, and that seemed to, like, it could have been a joke, it could have not been. It's hard to know, but that was really chilling to read.
Yeah, thank you. It was. When my sister read the essay, she actually asked me, she said, is that real? And I said, you can't make that stuff up. On the one hand, we were out on this long run, and I had basically my knee started hurting. I just could not make it home. And so the friend I was running with flagged down like a park police, but who is an official, city police officer. And so gave us a ride. We don't live too far from the park. But as we were getting out, he turns and he says, I went to get out and sort of forgot that you can't get out of the back seat of a police car. You can't let yourself out. And he said, yeah. He said, hey, you guys don't mind if I run your names, do you? And, my friend just kind of laughed it off. And as you mentioned, I said to him at the time that I was a member of the Tennessee bar. And that kind of, diffused the situation. And, but, in an instant, that situation could have gone sideways, I think. And unfortunately, it has gone sideways for a lot of people. So I kind of felt compelled to write about that. I think it's been, my hope is that it's a good conversation starter and just gets people maybe to empathize a bit more with some of the experiences that some of us have.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we'll share the essay, follow up with folks after. Now, Derrick, I wanted to turn to you for a minute. Obviously, I know you talked about in the beginning about your decision to launch Kingdom and how important it was for you to do that. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, I think it's clear to everybody that sports have been important to you, important to your life. But I wondered if you could talk about how when you were in the NFL already, you were thinking you wanted to kind of do more. You kind of hinted at that at the beginning. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that kind of transition to doing what you're doing now.
Yeah, you can go pretty far down the rabbit hole. I think when you look at Black and brown communities, our heroes are usually athletes, entertainers. Those are the industries that we've excelled in to this point. Obviously, we're breaking down barriers in many other industries, but that's just been the typical narrative. Somebody comes from the community, they make it out, and they achieve all this success. But the playbook that's given to us is, hey, let's go back to to my hometown and do a football camp, right? Let's do a back to school drive. And, those things are great, but what does that really change? And I always thought critically about it because I felt like, especially I'm just gonna keep it real, like especially being a part of certain organizations and like it's all about the that picture, right? That Kodak moment of the player in the community handing out school supplies or whatever have you, and that to me was phony. It didn't feel authentic, and I knew that it would take more than just a photo op with an underserved kid at a school or at a community center to move the needle. It would take more sustained, ingrained effort, and we just needed a new playbook. And so when you look at athletes, we come into money very quick. We have a very good platform and influence, and I feel like we haven't fully utilized it. Right? I feel like guys come and go, and they look back and they're like, "Dang, I misused my influence. I didn't really take advantage of that." And so for me, halfway through my career, I really started to ask myself those questions like, what was I doing? Like, I need to be doing more. I see people getting killed in the street, and I see, mass incarceration, all these injustices that are, that they plague us, and it pains me. And so I started to think critically, like how could athletes in particular, how could we leverage our collective influence and capital and brand, all those things that carry weight. And so that to me is an ongoing thing that I'm working towards currently, in talking with guys that live in Nashville and trying to figure out how we could use group economics and use our collective influence to make a change, right? Because a lot of people have aspirations to go back to their community and make a change, but we just don't always have the right playbook. And so, that for me is something that I feel like I've been tasked with, and trying to break down some of those barriers of collaboration, amongst my peers and really creating a new model.
That's really, without naming names, of course, but it sounds like you said you're talking with a lot of current and former athletes about kind of trying to implement this playbook in their own communities to have like a network effect. So it's not just you at Impact Investing, you and your team at Kingdom, but really athletes across the country and globally as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to, you're not knowing what you don't know, and we always think that as athletes that we have to be the main check in a deal or the main check in a project. Nah, that's not the model, right? It's all about OPM, other people's money. How can you leverage who you are and what you have to bring like institutional money to deals or other sources of capital, or leveraging government resources. Like I'm talking particularly about funding small businesses and real estate development. Like there's a lot of tools in the toolbox that can be leveraged, and I think it really boils down to education, right? We're not taught these things.
Yeah.
Jared, can I interrupt here and say, I think one of the things that's really cool about what Derrick is doing is, the prospect, like you said, in communities, and this isn't just communities of color, but I think it especially affects communities of color. Like, why did I start running? Because I wasn't very good at basketball, and what an amazing testimony it will be to the work that, guys like Derrick are doing. I want Derrick to inspire not a bunch of kids in Nashville to go be football players, right? Because the chances of that, the odds of that are so low of someone actually paying you money to play a sport, right? The odds are so low. But how much better if 10, 15 years from now, there's a whole group of bankers, there's a whole group of real estate investors, developers that are like, how'd you get into real estate investment? And they go, oh, I was really inspired by this football player. That would be tremendous, right? And that kind of inspiration, I think, is what many of our communities really need. To not, nothing against like athletes, professional athletes have a platform like Derrick's saying, but man, to inspire to do other things too, that's powerful stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's why we thank you both for doing things like this. I think, we had about 1,000 people register for this, and so that's just one example of just hopefully more people can kind of hear that message. Now we got some audience questions, so I'm just going to have to look at my other screen here to read them for a moment, and I'll kind of choose, or you guys can just raise your hand, whoever would like to answer it first. The first question is, what's the best way to begin a productive conversation about race without offending people, while also ensuring that you have an actual meaningful conversation? And I think that's a question that, I in my own life, people ask me a lot, not that I'm by any means an expert on this, but people always, get nervous about talking about this topic. So I wondered if you all had any advice or thoughts.
I would say to preface the conversation with your intentions. We're in such of a cancel culture nowadays that you can't say anything right, and so I think that we gotta table that. If we really want to start making change and really want to start making progress, like, we can't be so sensitive, right? I understand that there's a lot of pain in these conversations, but if my white friends reaching out to me and asking me, right, and they're inquiring, like, I have to be receptive to that, regardless of, if they might say something wrong, or I gotta give them grace on that. And so I think that, clearly defining and articulating your intentions before you even jump into it, I think will help diffuse any, animosity or any, challenges that come up with the conversation.
So almost like something like, even if you're concerned about saying the wrong thing, by stating your intentions, could be an example, could be, trying to understand how, like, for me, as somebody who's obviously not a person of color, I'm a white guy, just to be blunt, to say, like, I'm trying to understand what I don't understand about this issue. Could you help me understand it from your perspective? Like, stating your intention like that, is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a whole bunch of white friends reach out to me and express, man, like, if you want to, I'm here to talk about it. Like, I would like to learn more. And, the fact that they're even reaching out to me is, to me, it's like, okay, well, that's step number one. You're showing me that you care, and that you actually you care to dive into some of these issues. And, a lot of it is people are just, they're ignorant. They don't really know how they may be perpetuating prejudices or racism. Maybe it's in subtle ways, right? Like, I had one of my buddies in real estate reach out to me. He was like, "Hey, man, like, talking about this." I'm like, I asked him, like, are you working with, other Black and brown developers, or are you working, like, who's around you in your circle? Are you in your comfort zone? And it's for everybody, right? Like, we all, at least for me, and I can only speak for me, but it seems like human nature is you want to be around people that look like you, act like you, think like you. It's a comfort zone. So in order to break, patterns and systemic things, like, you have to get out of that comfort zone. So it means hiring different people. It means associating and doing life with different types of people. And so I think that when you have good intentions from people reaching out that really care, then you gotta be, patient, and you gotta be graceful with how you handle those conversations. So I think if the intentions are clearly defined, and I think that a meaningful conversation can be had.
Thank you. And then Shaka, do you want to take that question as well?
Well, I would just kind of add on to that continuity is so important too, because I think so many, we're in this, not only are we in this kind of cancel culture that Derrick mentioned, but I think social media has made us think that you have to convince somebody over the course of 2 comments or 1 tweet or a tweet thread. Like, we are all carrying prejudices that we've had ingrained for maybe decades. You're not going to do it you're not going to do it with a meme on Facebook. Like, there's not one graphic, to rule them all, that all of a sudden everybody's going to look at and go, oh, you know what? I get it now. It's just not going to happen. So I think we have to not only extend grace, but we've got to give people the time to kind of come around and deal with these issues in themselves. So.
Yeah, so it's almost like, to your point about social media, as an example, is saying, like, it's going to take more than it's going to take more than a couple tweets. It's going to take more than one conversation. It's probably going to take more than even a week. It's going to almost be a to, hopefully not a lifelong in terms of the need to change for the folks who do need to change, but it's going to take time.
Yeah, it's going to take time. And then I also think, and there's differences of opinion about this, right? So, I mean, I can't, the title of even this time that we have together, kind of hear from an expert. Like, I don't feel like I'm an expert on this. I'm just trying to get by, like most of us, right? But I think that for me, I'm trying to acknowledge when somebody has had a change of heart and a change of mind, and they say, you know what? I think I was wrong on that stuff. Like, I don't think it's helpful to drag people for going, oh, well, you saw the light now, but where were you 10 years ago and doing such and such? I don't think that's always the most productive thing. Various, like, it's all situational, and it can all vary. I do think also Derrick's point about, like, hey, just take a look at the people around you. I mean, we have found in our family, we've challenged ourselves to ask the question, how often do we have someone over for dinner who doesn't look like us? Unfortunately, now we have nobody over for dinner, but that's unrelated to race. But I think it's a valid question. How often do you not just walk past somebody downtown or whatever, but how often do you break bread with someone who's not in your socioeconomic strata?
Yeah. So kind of a follow-up question. It's not going to seem like a follow-up, but this person asks, and I'm going to kind of interpret the question after I read it. Do you agree with Bill Clinton that Americans will do something wrong 6 times before they do it right, instead of doing it right the first time? And I kind of read that question, and of course you all interpret it however you want, but where I think it ties into the prior question and some of your answers is, obviously the country, we as a society have gotten a lot of things wrong, and everybody in this moment is kind of hoping for hope, and that even if we've done things wrong in the past, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to continue to do them wrong, and that we'll do them wrong in the future. So I'm wondering if you could just kind of talk about that question a little bit. I know it's kind of broad, but whoever would like to start.
That's a convenient quote for Bill Clinton. But I'll say that, basically the way I look at it is you're going to make mistakes, right? It's as broad as, the first time I started playing ball, I wasn't an elite, professional athlete, right? It was trial and error, trial and error, trial and error. It's not just Americans, it's everybody. And so, whether, like, for me, I'll use my example. I finished up a 9-year NFL career and simultaneously launched into, real estate investing and development. I was doing things, while I was playing, but to really, like, be out there and exposed and be vulnerable in a field that I wasn't really all the way an expert in and wasn't really familiar with, like, to go from being an expert or in the 1%, to being a rookie again is a very vulnerable, state in transition. So, I know I'm making mistakes, right? I'm doing things right, but I'm also making mistakes. And so it's not we're always, there's never an end journey. Like, there's never an end point. It's a journey. And so I think that along the way, whether it's, you're starting a new career or you're getting into, something, foreign or whatever it is, or you're trying to master something, it's going to be a process, right? You're going to make mistakes. And so if you don't look at those mistakes as being failures and just part of the process, you'll have a way more healthier perspective on whatever it is you're going through.
Yeah, that's helpful. Shaka, what do you think?
No, I don't really have much to add to that one. I think that's right. Sign on to it.
Gotcha. Another question, I'm just kind of picking these at random here, this is directed directly to you, Derrick, but I think both you can ask, and it's something that we just internally at Wonolo think about a lot, which is, well, first off, the questioner thanked you both for your time, but also wanted to know, what are some ways that white allies can help to break down barriers for people of color?
Is that for me or Shaka?
I think maybe we can start with you, Derrick, if you don't mind.
Okay. I don't know. I don't really look at people to do anything for me, but I mean, I've always been like that, right? But I think that there are there are certain things that need to be, like, I don't know. This is a hard question for me because I'm not looking at white people to do anything for me, right? I'm looking at what I can do and what I'm accountable for. Now, I think that if you're talking to, certain people that have decision-making powers, or they're hiring and they're in a certain place of, authority, I think there is some responsibility on that person for equity, right? I'm not talking about, affirmative action. I'm talking about equity. Like, whoever's the best person for that job, regardless of race, background, it's all about skill set for me, right? I'm going to hire somebody based on, are they competent enough, not their race. And so I think that those types of practices should be instilled, right? Now, obviously, we have a lot of catching up to do as a Black community. Let's just, we did not, start the race at the same time. So there are certain things that, I don't think it's just white people, right? I don't think it's just, a certain race. I think it's all of us. Like, if we're in a position of power or we have some influence, I think there are certain measures that need to be implemented to foster an environment of equity, right? But I don't personally think that it falls on one race, but that's my opinion.
Gotcha. No, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tricky one, and this is, I mean, one of the, I think, most important questions that our culture is dealing with right now, and there's not a lot of simplistic or answers, right? I mean, because we're talking about hundreds of years, things that build up over time, systems that build up over time. I mean, I think, so I don't want to reject the question, but I will maybe kind of morph it a little bit, because I think it's definitely really fashionable right now to show, to kind of virtue signal, right? And to show, to black out your Instagram for a day, and to, to join a book club. And I don't know, it's fashionable to be woke. I'll just say that. I think what I would love to see happen is, let's talk about these things, but blacking out your screen on Instagram is not, I mean, John Lewis just passed away. You don't get to be a civil rights icon by sitting at home and going, I'll show them, I'm going to stay off Twitter today. Come on. Like, that's not real activism, and it's not real change. And so I guess I would just challenge people, not so much to be sort of slacktivists, but maybe do some other things. I mean, I told a colleague, actually, white colleague in Michigan, I said, hey, one thing, if you don't have personal relationships with people of color, like, what does your daily life look like? Are you ever, for instance, do you ever go eat at restaurants? I know you like to eat. Do you eat at restaurants in neighborhoods with people of color, or where you sit by people? I mean, like, what's your general interaction and engagement like? And I think that's where a lot of people need to just really check themselves and go, who am I surrounded by?
Yeah.
Because and I'm sure, I mean, I'm sure Derrick's been in situations like this. I have to think in his second career, more so than in his first career, where you're the one guy in the room. You're the one guy, man of color in the room. If you want to be a white ally, you should ask yourself the question, like, how come there's only one in the room? Why is that? All things being equal, this is an industry that lots of people would like to be a part of. How come there aren't any, Latino, Asian American? Like, where's everybody? I would say ask that question.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. One of my final questions was going to be, and I know we're kind of getting close to time, and as I get this question, I think there's a poll for folks who joined online at Slido, you can put a poll and just let us know what you think of this this presentation or of this conversation. But I wanted to get at, to your point, and I hadn't heard that term in a long time, slacktivism. I like that a lot. Is what is something concrete, recognizing that we have a diverse group of people and on this call, and I mean diverse in a variety of ways, but what is something concrete you think folks can do, recognizing we're in the middle of a pandemic, but like within 24 hours of this call to take, and again, it's going to be a baby step, because to both your points, this isn't something that just happens overnight. It isn't like one tweet, one conversation, one action that really leads to change. But I wonder if there's something you would recommend that folks could do within the next 24 hours to kind of start going down a little bit of a better road to get us to a place where there's where we feel like more of a community in general, if that makes sense. It's a hard question, I know.
I'll jump in, Derrick, and give you a sec. I mean, it is a tough question. What's the next best thing you can do? It's a good question. I would, if people haven't read it already, there's two things that I just think are such powerful written pieces. One is pretty familiar. It's the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail. And it's just such a good letter that I think is written with the kind of spirit that I would hope we bring to these conversations. One of care for the community, but also rebuke. And to say, like, we're going to name when things are unjust. The other thing is is written by Frederick Douglass, and it was just, maybe people saw it making the rounds, but a couple weeks ago. But it's called "What to the Slave Is July 4th," and I mean, this is a man who, like, professionally was very close with Abraham Lincoln, escaped slavery, teaches himself to read, befriends Abraham Lincoln. I mean, like, what a life. And I just think that in terms of perspective, those are two really, really powerful pieces, so clear, so well written. So those would be my suggestions.
Those are great suggestions. We can include links to both of those when we do some follow-up after. So thank you for those. Derrick, what recommendations would you have? Could be something to read, could be something to do. I know it's a tough question and we're putting you on the spot here, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think that if this is something that, I mean, from what perspective are we asking this question? Like, who is this question, meant to help?
Yeah.
Like, from what perspective?
That's a good question. It's making me think. I mean, I think it's from the question of, from the perspective of, let's say, somebody who is not from an underserved or underprivileged community who wants to help out and doesn't know what to do and doesn't know where to start. Maybe he or she is doing the slacktivism right now, but wants to take some more concrete actions. What should they do?
Right. So I would say that, it starts with asking yourself your own questions about what is it really that I care about. So when I turn off social media and I turn off the news, do I still care about these things? And I would start there, right? And I've done this, obviously I come from these type of communities, so I understand it at a deeper level. But if somebody who doesn't, if that's something that they care about being part of the change, I think that you have to identify, how can you be an asset? How can you be a value add? If you want to change and be a part of the solution of changing these communities in a meaningful way, then you got to identify, like, what is your, value add to the cause, right? And a lot of it is, to Shaka's point, is education and reading up on, the history, right? People, it's an uncomfortable history. It's a complicated history of America. And so, if you don't know that, and if you just look at, present day, and you ask, why are communities like this? You know, why are there ghettos, right? Why are Black people, you know, in this position, right? It was by design, and it was by intention, and it was by a system that is currently being exposed, but has been working flawlessly for hundreds of years. And so I feel that if you are from this different background or different, you know, area of town or whatever, and you care about these things, you can learn, you can educate yourself. And I think that you have to start with, how can I personally, you know, help? Is that writing a check? Is it going to, you know, volunteer at a local nonprofit that fits a cause within that community that you really believe in, right? And so I think that it gets real nuanced and real personal when you start to ask questions to yourself, like, how can I really help? And how can I be involved in this?
Thank you. That's really helpful. Well, I wanted to provide some closing remarks to start by just saying thank you both so much for taking the time today. I realize we went over a little bit, but I know I learned a lot. I think it sounds really important, of course, is the education piece for making sure people are trying to learn more about some of the inequalities and some of the gaps, and then trying to act on them in a real way. It sounds like that's a commonality in what you both recommend folks do. And I wanted to thank everybody else for joining today's call. We're going to send a lot of follow-up materials after to where you can learn more about you know, where the kingdom and where Shaka works as well, and some of the readings that they reference. So thank you very much for joining. And if you have any feedback, I know folks know how to reach out to us. So by all means, please send feedback. But thank you both again, and thank you everybody for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate you having us. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.